What's up, guys? Welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. And today I'm going to be doing a rhetorical analysis on Peacemaker. I recently finished binge watching the show and I feel like I just had to because there's so much that I loved about it, so much I thought was done well, and because I've been in a class that's been analyzing media, I thought I might as well put those skills to use. And talk about how wonderful I thought this show was. So without further ado, let's get started. While there is a lot about the show I can't address, I specifically want to talk about how they made Peacemaker a sympathetic character and why I loved it, because one, I was not expecting it, two, they did it extremely well, and three, I can relate it to Huckleberry Finn, and that's not something that I thought I could ever do between Peacemaker and Huckleberry Finn, and I want to, so that's what we're going to be talking about. I also, don't like making very long videos, so if you want me to talk about anything else about the Peacemaker show, I would be happy to. Please comment below if you want to see that, if you want to see any other kind of video from me. But yeah, Peacemaker is a sympathetic character. So let's talk about how we were initially introduced to Peacemaker. We were introduced to Peacemaker in the new Suicide Squad movie. He's played by John Cena. His whole thing is that he values peace, specifically in the context of American peace, above all else, and, quote, doesn't care how many men, children, or women he needs to kill in order to attain it. And that's what makes him sociopathic or psychopathic, why he's in Reveiw. He's also a weapons expert, and throughout the movie he is seen to be having ego problems. He's always in competition with Bloodsport, and eventually he is a traitor and kills Rick Flag. Those are all spoilers, but hopefully you've seen the new Suicide Squad movie by now. That, at the end, is where we see him. He was shot by Bloodsport, but he survived, and that is where we meet him at the beginning of Peacemaker, the TV show. From the very beginning, they try to make him a more sympathetic character, and that surprised me because, one, it worked. And two, because Peacemaker isn't a very serious character. I mean, he's played by John Cena. Two, he has a ridiculous costume. It's bright red and white. It's red, white, and blue. He has a funky looking helmet, which many fans have likened to looking like a toilet bowl. And he's shown to be immature and competitive and kind of childish and an asshole. So the fact that they wanted to go in that direction of making him a sympathetic character and then actually succeeding surprised me, and I think surprised a lot of other people. And how they did this is taking place literally right after the events of the Suicide Squad movie, and we're seeing him reevaluate what happened in that movie and reevaluating himself based on the events in that movie, especially right before he killed Rick Flag, and the regret he has behind it, the remorse, and he begins to question whether what he's doing is right and whether he's actually a hero or not, and that is done with a series of flashbacks and interactions with the general public. There are about 3 different layers of people that he interacts with, and he receives opinions on himself from those 3 different layers. The first are the people closest to him, which would be people who knew him before the Suicide Squad incident, which would be his dad and Vigilante. The second would be people who he works with, which would be Task Force X, so like Adebayo, Hardcore, and Economos, and Mern, and to a broader extent Amanda Waller, but I'm more lenient to talk about her because she wasn't directly involved. She was directly involved, but also she wasn't like, it's complicated. Anyway, and then the third layer, which are the people they encounter on the outside, so that'd be like the dad's neighbor or the janitor from the hospital, people who don't see him on a regular basis, who don't know him. And so he's receiving these opinions about himself from these people, and he's really beginning to question why they hold these opinions and question whether he likes these opinions, and whether they're true or not. He really starts to question whether he is a hero. And so from these three, he's hearing different opinions. From his dad, he's hearing that he's a fuck up, that he is barely a man, that he is terrible, that he's a disappointment. And he's hearing from Vigilante that he is the best hero ever, and that of course he's a good person because he's killing bad people. But he's realizing that these two are not the most reliable sources. I can get further into his dad and Vigilante, but just there, he's realizing that they are not the most reliable source. And then you have Layer 2, the people he works with, and they view him as just a weapon. He's a murderer. He's a trained killer who can use basically every weapon known to man. And he realizes he doesn't like that either. And that while they're more reliable, he doesn't like that opinion of them. He doesn't like that he's seen solely as a murderer, because he's realizing that he doesn't actually like to kill people. And then you have the outside, and that's like a mixed bag. And I think the neighbor is ultimately what gets to him, because the neighbor outright calls him out and says, hey, I really don't think you are an actual superhero, because why were you in prison? Why do you kill people? Batman doesn't kill people. These other superheroes, they don't kill people, so why do you get to kill people and become a superhero? And I think ultimately, while it's just played off as like a funny interaction, is the valid question that shakes him and gets him to begin to question whether he's on the side of good or not, and whether justifying these murders as being in the name of peace truly justifies it. Like, is he truly a good person for killing bad people, or is it just an excuse for him to get away with doing whatever he wants? Basically, from the first episode, he realizes that the person that he sees in himself and the person others are seeing, that person is not the same person. It does not line up. And as we go deep into the episodes, we learn why he sees himself as a hero as we get introduced to his dad and his dad's past. Because his dad is a supervillain called the White Dragon, who is, I think, the leader of like all white supremacists and Nazis in America. I don't know how far that power extends, because you only see a pretty small amount of it, but we see that he has a lot of power and a lot of sway across a large number of people, a large number of very dangerous people. Not only that, but his dad has a lot of technology. He has a super like quantum space just for his own like tech. So there's a lot we don't know about the dad, but we do know the dad is dangerous. We know the dad is racist, sexist, homophobic, a Nazi. He is a Nazi. He is the leader of the Nazis in America. And we know that through flashbacks, that is how Peacemaker and his brother were raised. And we also know through the interactions from the first 10 minutes of the first episode that Peacemaker is very aware that racism and sexism and homophobia are wrong. And he knows that his dad is wrong in these beliefs. And that's how we begin to think that he is the hero in this, because he knows that his dad is wrong. He knows he's a better person than his dad, but he was still raised by his dad, so he doesn't know how to act in accordance with those beliefs, if that makes sense. It's like Huckleberry Finn, where you were raised in a racist household and you know that racism is wrong, but you don't have the tools to combat it. You don't have, because you weren't given the proper tools to be not racist. You just know that it's wrong. So you try to combat racism in the only tools you have, which sadly were tools made by racists. He knows his dad is wrong. He knows that what he was raised with was wrong, but he doesn't know how to not be that. He just knows that it's wrong. And so he sees himself as better than his dad, and therefore a better person, and therefore a good person. But he's realizing that he still has a lot to go, a long way to go, to actually be a solution to the problem instead of just not being as much of a problem as his dad. That is where we begin to see the sympathetic character, because before we thought he was just an asshole because he felt entitled to be an asshole. You know, we see him making sexist comments and dick jokes and racist assumptions, and we're just like, oh, this man is conservative America. You know, he has the red, white, and blue, he has the ultra patriotism, he holds these, you know, horrible beliefs. He must just be a commentary on conservative America. But then we see what he was raised with, and we see his uncomfortableness around what he was raised with. And we see him being uncomfortable around being assumed to be racist or assumed to be sexist because he doesn't see himself that way. Not because he thinks he, not because he thinks he isn't, but he knows, he thinks he isn't racist. And so it's surprising to him to find out that he still is, just because he never learned the multifacetedness of racism. And so it's no longer, oh, this man's an asshole because he feels like he's entitled to be. This man's an asshole because he knows no other way to be, and he was never told to not be an asshole. And that becomes sad, because now instead of this like, oh, this huge man who thinks he's the shit, we see this scared little kid who doesn't know what to do, and he feels alone in the world because everyone hates him and he doesn't know why. And that is something I think a lot of people can relate to, is not understanding how to function in the world because of how you were raised, because you weren't given the proper tools. Maybe it's not because, oh, you were raised by a KKK member and now you don't know how to interact with people and everybody thinks you're a dick. It's a universal feeling to feel like you weren't raised properly. Either it's because you have a mental illness and your parents didn't prepare you for it, or you were gay and you weren't raised in a kind household, or maybe just because you were socialized differently than the kids around you. It makes him relatable, not because of the specifics of how he was raised, but because of the, I don't know how to function in society because no one ever told me how. Because there's always that one blind spot that everybody has, and that blind spot is different for everybody. But there's always one part of society that we just don't get, and that is what makes him so relatable. And as for the, oh, he's just a scared, confused little kid act, they, I feel like, emphasize this so well by surrounding him with vigilante and with his dad, because I feel like those characters offset Peacemaker and really highlight the things that Peacemaker is not. Because once I said, it's easy to assume that, oh, he's just an asshole and he's immature because he feels entitled to be, because that's just how toxic masculinity is. But then you have characters like Peacemaker's father, and you realize, oh, this is an actual asshole, not someone who just doesn't know. It distinguishes, it makes that difference, because I feel like, especially with cancel culture, it's hard to tell that difference of, oh, is somebody being a dick because they actually don't know, or is somebody being a dick because they feel like they're entitled to be a dick? Like, is somebody racist on accident, or is somebody racist because they actually hold racist beliefs? And so they do that by showing Peacemaker, who does racist and sexist shit because he doesn't know any better, or because he thinks he's not doing it, versus the White Dragon, who purposely says racist shit and purposely is sexist because he genuinely holds his beliefs that these people are inferior to him. And now for the childlike thing, you place Peacemaker, who is canonically 40 years old, with Vigilante, who canonically is in his early 20s. And so you have them acting exactly the same and hanging out and doing all these things together. And without Vigilante there, you don't think about the way that Peacemaker acts, because it's just all part of that asshole persona. But then you put him with an actual literal child, and you're like, wow, this isn't that he's immature. It's that he's literally infantilized himself, or he was never able to grow up because of the way his father raised him, or because of the trauma he endured. And it's no longer oh, we're just letting boys be boys. It's there's actually something wrong here. And the other great thing about Vigilante being there is that it humanizes Peacemaker in a way, because as I said earlier, the first thought we get of Peacemaker is that he is some psychopathic killer who conflates peace with murder and genuinely thinks it's good. And he did genuinely think it was good. But as you see him begin to question it and realize that killing is not as morally sound, whether you justify it with peace, you see him question that. You have Vigilante over here who straight up says, I do enjoy killing people. And he does enjoy killing people. You see it throughout the entirety of the show, is even though he vows to kill only bad people, he has no issue killing the wrong person. He has no issue killing children. He has no issue killing the innocent for whatever reason. They even talk about how they accidentally kill the wrong people sometimes. And Peacemaker feels bad about that. And Vigilante doesn't, because he still got to kill someone and he still finds it really fun. The way they approach it is different, and that highlights the humanity of Peacemaker, because he feels like this is a burden to him. This is a mission he has to go on to right the wrongs of his past, whereas Vigilante does it just for kicks. You know, he was a bored kid one day, so he decided he was going to be a superhero, and he latched onto this guy who is 20 years older than him, and idolizes the shit out of him. And that juxtaposition of an actual, like, idealistic, sociopathic child versus a mentally disturbed, traumatized 40-year-old doing his best, really served to make him a more sympathetic character, because now they've now subverted the initial reaction to him. You know, when we first saw him in Suicide Squad, we were like, oh, this is like any conservative man over 30, thinking he's entitled to women, think he's entitled to all of the privileges he has in life, while recognizing none of the privileges that he has in life, and who likes to kill people and just loves America and so on and so forth. Versus now we have, oh, this man was basically emotionally and probably physically abused his entire life by a father who does not love him, raised by the leader of the Nazis in America, and had the death of his brother held over his head his entire life, so that he felt that this was his only way of proving he was better than his father. And that's sad. And now you feel bad for him, because that's so relatable. I mean, all the things I just described isn't relatable, but feeling out of place, not knowing what to do, dealing with the past, that, and family who doesn't like you, that is super relatable to the audience. Because people watch comics to escape, or because they think they're cool, and this is cool. It's a fun show. It's still a humorous show. And the humor doesn't feel like shoehorned in there, whatever. It feels very natural because it's a very naturally humorous character. But at the same time, they're able to address all these serious things throughout the show while keeping it light, you know? And I like that. And the last thing I'm going to bring up about their creation of Peacemaker as a sympathetic character is the underlying helplessness that Peacemaker has. He is shown to be extremely upset and sad and confused the entire time. They see him crying and being insightful and introspective. And we're seeing these things interrupted by usually Vigilante, who is that expression of toxic masculinity. Those people closest to him, Peacemaker's dad and Vigilante, are expressions of toxic masculinity, where boys aren't allowed to cry, they're not supposed to because that's not tough, and so you always see these things being interrupted. And he really gets no closure throughout the show, throughout any things that happen to him in Suicide Squad. And so while each bombshell is being dropped on him, the bombshell of him not being able to trust his friends because they betrayed him not being able to trust the government because they betrayed him not being able to trust his dad or his own memories because all of these memories of his dad being abusive is now coming back to him. And he doesn't know how to handle it, and it's an overwhelming wave of emotion, and he can't do anything about it because he's not allowed to cry. And he understands that men can cry. It's that he literally is not allowed to cry. He can't afford to because of the mission, because of the people around him. And then eventually, spoiler alert, when he kills his dad, that's not the end of it. He still has to deal with the emotional and traumatic fallout of not only killing his own father, but also the now unlocked, repressed memories that he had of his childhood and of his upbringing. Because he knew his dad was bad, and he knew his dad was racist, and he knew all of that. But he spent his whole life feeling like he murdered his brother, and his dad blaming him for that. He lived his whole life thinking he had to be a murderer in order to make up for it, thinking that he was a good person, realizing that he's not, thinking his dad was still redeemable in the end, realizing that he wasn't, and basically had his entire life turned on his head, and that's so fucking hard to deal with. But he has no time to, and he can't deal with it. Because he doesn't know how, he doesn't have the time, he can't tell anybody about it, and he's basically alone. And that, as someone who deals with PTSD and multiple other mental illnesses, that is so fucking relatable. Because even though you have all this whole support system around you, there's never time to cry. There's never any time to really think about it. You don't know how to collect your thoughts on it because all these things are just popping up, and you lived your whole life one way and now you're realizing that it wasn't that way, that your memories are wrong. Not just the memories, but the feelings around those memories are wrong. And now you spent, I mean, I've only lived for 19 years, but he's 40. That's twice as long as I've been alive, almost. And that's hard to deal with, especially by yourself, and you feel like you can't reach out to anybody because ultimately no one is going to understand. And while it's a really relatable concept, specifically, no one's going to understand because everybody processes it differently. And that's why I really appreciated the ending of it, was because, yeah, we saved the world, maybe, but none of that went away. You know, his dad is still there, and he's scared because he doesn't know how to deal with it. He's just now begun to learn and grow that past that person that he was. But he still doesn't have the tools to deal with it. He doesn't have he's gaining the tools to be a better person, but he doesn't have the tools on how to deal with mental illness and mental health, and neither do the people around him. Not really, because they're dealing with their own shit, and they all have wildly bad ways at expressing it and repressing it and dealing with it. So, yeah, that is extremely relatable, and I love that show, and I highly recommend it if you haven't watched it, and I feel bad that I've spoiled some parts of it, but it was very surprising for me to begin watching this and actually feel bad for him and feel sympathetic for him and empathetic in a way, because I also had that issue with memories and realizing that, hey, this whole part of your life you remembered differently than how it happened, and now you're remembering how it actually happened, and shit, it was not as good as you thought it was. and not being able to talk to anybody about it, or feeling you have to be able to talk to about it, or the way that you live your life, you don't have the luxury to just break down about it. Because college is a lot of things, but college is fast-paced, especially on a quarter system, and you don't have time to just stop and take a breath and breathe, and there's no place for you to be alone to cry. So if you're not comfortable with that kind of shit, and most people aren't, you just hold it in, and that only makes it worse. I'm gonna be honest, it's been hard the past few weeks, the past quarter, the whole quarter. It's week 8, but we've been struggling the whole time. And there's nothing really, because I have a roommate. I can't just sit in my room and cry. I can't go to the bathroom and cry because it's a communal bathroom and everybody's in there. And there's no time to, because you have classes and you can't just skip the classes because that'll just make you feel worse. And when you're not in class, you want to hang out with your friends because that's the only time you don't have class. And there's basically no time to really be yourself. And so you just see all these people who are stressed out and sad and angry and hurt and trying to hold it together because there's no time, there's no place to not have your shit together. It's like a feeling of we're all drowning and none of us can save the other, but we all understood that we were drowning together. That's what college feels like. And that's what at least I took away from Peacemaker at the end of the last episode, was that he had this feeling of he's drowning, but at least he's not drowning alone. So that has been my rhetorical analysis of Peacemaker as a sympathetic character. I am once again so sorry that I keep making these endings so depressing, but it's hard not to when I talk about such serious topics. I hope this didn't bum out your day. I'm doing fine. I'm living. I am trying to get the help that I need. It's hard, but I'm living. And that's what matters, is that I'm trying my best. So long and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes.